This video is going to be about where the rubber meets the road. So last time I talked about tonality in games, and one of the things that initially I wanted to talk about in that but didn't really have the time to, given how long that video turned out to be, is the way game mechanics interact with the way your game runs and how it feels. And part of that is also tied into what system you choose to use when you decide to run a tabletop game. And this isn't necessarily going to be D&D, and in fact many times won't be. I've played a number of different tabletop systems over the years, and every single one of them comes with its own expectations. I've played in Force and Destiny games, which is Star Wars, and there's a sort of expectation that you have going into a Star Wars campaign that things will be a bit more cinematic. The game system itself is built with theater of the mind baked into the basic set of game rules. The rules don't really presuppose that it will be played on a gridded battle mat to the same degree that D&D does. In fact, it lends itself a lot better to a DM giving descriptions of a scene and players describing their actions in that scene, and the DM telling them, alright, based on what you said you want to try and do, here are the rolls you need to make to be successful. And that, I think, really gave me a good understanding of the way game mechanics should interact with the game you're trying to run, hence where the rubber meets the road. The interaction between the type of story you're trying to tell and the type of fun you're trying to have, and the rules that will get you the closest to that will be the least intrusive on the way you're trying to play, while still giving that game enough structure to work and to feel true. So what does this mean? It means that when you're figuring out how you're going to run a game and what type of system you're running, you need to think about what the implications of that system are. When you tell your players that you're going to be running a Call of Cthulhu campaign, they will come to the table with certain expectations. They will come to the table knowing that their characters are imminently mortal, and that the universe is wide and uncaring. The story is not incumbent upon their success, and their failure is just as viable an ending as any possible success. Likewise, when you go to a D&D campaign, you ask a number of questions of your DM that set up the expectations that you'll have for the game, and when you invite players to that game, you, whether or not you know it, set up those expectations pretty early on. There are lots of ways you can run the game and lots of different types of homebrew that you can do. If you're trying to tell a very Lord of the Rings type story, I would recommend letting your players know immediately off the bat not only is that what you're going for, but that you're going to run something like maybe an Epic 6 campaign, which is to say that 6th level is epic. That's as high as you will get, and it will take a while to get there, which is not the normal pace that D&D assumes you'll be leveling up at. It really establishes the scale of the world that you're going to be interacting with, the types of feats that you should expect your characters to be capable of, and the sort of enemies that you'll really be facing toe-to-toe. Similarly, whether or not you include homebrew, what type of homebrew and what the homebrew is focused on lets people know exactly what kind of campaign you're going to be running. If you make a bunch of homebrew rules for various qualities of weapons, like, distinguishing between a crude, cobbled together spear that a goblin or kuoto or kobold might be wielding versus a kind of more mass-produced one that foot soldiers would have versus a masterworked piece that, the Kingsguard might have. In base D&D, these are all mechanically, and as far as the rules are concerned, the exact same item. All of those are just spears, but in your campaign, they might be wildly different. The crude ones might have a chance of breaking. Perhaps mass-produced weapons aren't capable of the same perfection that better versions of are, and maybe you have to re-roll anytime you roll maximum damage with one of those weapons. There are ways that you can change things that affect the way your players perceive your world. In that case, finding a masterwork spear is in many ways similar to finding your first magic item, even though it's, for all intents and purposes, the base weapon that they would have started the game with in any other campaign. But you have changed the perception of the world by altering the rules. And it can go the other way as well. If you have some kind of, you can start at the other end, and well, I suppose this is me being bad at talking. Oftentimes, though, the players experience it in that direction. The DM experiences it from the other way. You should be crafting the rules for your setting to reflect the world as you want it to be experienced. So, in short, when you're looking at systems to pick up or homebrew to add to your game, look at what that focuses on. Because you might have homebrew that you think is really quite clever and good. I came up with that weapon system that I described, and then proceeded to run a very high fantasy, going up to 20th level, high magic items everywhere campaign. I didn't implement that system, even though I really like it, because it has no place in the game that I'm trying to run. It would be a pointless muddying of the waters. Players would spend the first couple levels of the game learning this brand new system that I've introduced, only to completely discard it. And so I would recommend that when you're looking at homebrew for your D&D games, or when you're looking at a brand new system that you want to bring to your players to run a new game, look at the things that those rules find important, and make sure that they're important to the story that you're trying to tell with your players.